If you're someone who relies on Google Calendar to remind you of important dates, you may now miss out on some.
Google removed cultural events like Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride Month, Jewish Heritage, and Hispanic Heritage, to name a few, from its default calendar.
Last week, some users noticed this change, which ultimately followed an online backlash. One Blue Sky user wrote, "This is what's so funny about rainbow capitalism and corporate blackface. It was never real, actual support, but the right and the left can't help but lose their minds over the fake pendulum swinging. It's like betting on theatre." Another Blue Sky user said, "Google Calendar removes Black History Month, Pride and more. Company says listed holidays were not sustainable for its model in latest move to roll back diversity efforts. I have never seen such a bunch of belly-crawling bootlickers in my life. Never even imagined them." Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke wrote on Blue Sky, "It's beyond disappointing to see Google comply with Donald Trump's most hateful urges. From celebrating our greatest heroes and our cultures to reminding us of the horrors of the past and the price of progress, these commemorations matter. Now, Google is playing a direct role in their erasure."
Despite some of the backlash, some ex-users on the right supported the move. David Leatherwood, Log Cabin Republicans digital director, wrote on X, "You're excited because Google Maps changed to Gulf of America. I'm excited because Google Calendar got rid of Pride Month. We are not the same." Another ex-user wrote, "Google has just removed Pride Month and Black History Month from the Calendar app. This comes as they obeyed Trump by changing the Gulf of Mexico's name to Gulf of America."
After the backlash, Google said in a statement, "Maintaining hundreds of moments manually and consistently globally wasn't scalable or sustainable."
So in mid-2024, we returned to showing only public holidays and national observances from timeanddate.com globally, while allowing users to manually add other important moments.
It's pretty hard to believe Google's explanation that it was too difficult to keep up with every occasion. This move by Google, after all, coincides with President Trump's move to appoint a new task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. The 2-year task force is chaired by the Attorney General, Pam Bondi.
The task force is assigned to review and identify any unlawful anti-Christian actions and change any objectionable policies and recommended steps to rectify past failures.
Well, on the Google point, first of all, I think it is fairly ludicrous to make the claim, as they are doing, that it was too impractical or too difficult to keep up with these holidays. I checked just before this segment what the market capitalization of Alphabet, Google's parent company, is, and it's $2.26 trillion. The idea that there's somebody in the back rooms of Google with a pen and paper trying to figure out where the public holidays lie, I think is just a completely absurd explanation. So if they wanted to change these things because they wanted to take a step back from so-called wokeness, just say that. But I find it a rather lily-livered thing for them to have done.
I think this is about money for Google. I think they saw the writing on the wall following the Dylan Mulvaney episode, which we talked about earlier. They saw that these DEI kinds of things, people celebrating Pride Month, that companies doing so, that was not selling with the people. That was something that people were a little bit sick of. And I think Donald Trump tapped into that quite well as well, and they decided to roll it back. Google's a company just like anybody else. They're going to try to maximize their profits, and if they thought that this kind of thing was driving people away, they're going to scratch it.
Yeah, I mean, I question, though, Dan, the extent to which that drives people away. I mean, would people really see, Pride Month pop up on their Google Calendar and be so outraged by that they would stop using Google? These things have been, as we alluded to, noted for quite some time on the calendar app.
I don't think just Pride Month. I think you put Pride Month at the beginning of June and that would be fine with most people. I think what it would be was if there was one on just about every day, right? If you're seeing something that's celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion on every day of the month, people are going to say, come on, do we really need to do this? Do we really need to celebrate every single milestone by every single ethnic group individually, or can we come together as Americans and celebrate our Americanness? I think that's kind of what it had to do with. I think it's obvious that you want to keep the holidays that are federal holidays, especially Juneteenth, right? MLK Jr. Day. Those are very important to recognize and to celebrate. But yeah, I think people just kind of get sick of it. I think people feel like they don't necessarily hate these groups. They don't necessarily hate LGBTQ people. They just don't like it being forced down their throats.
I hear you. I just don't really agree, because I think that part of this is about making events that celebrate diversity or sometimes commemorate terrible events in American or world history less visible. And I think there has been a broad push against DEI in ways that are really a pretext for pushing back against racial equity itself or gender equity itself from people who don't like that, who feel challenged by it, who feel perhaps that their societal position is challenged by those things. And that is where my skepticism of it really resides.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think what people see when they see these DEI kind of causes that are celebrated is they see it as them being called a racist, them being called a bigot. We have to remind you of all this stuff. We have to constantly tell you about these days and about these events and about these milestones, because we don't think you appreciate them enough, because we think you are bigoted. We think you may be unconsciously racist. Or go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that goes again to the debate about things like school curricula, where there's this argument about, for example, you shouldn't basically allude to or mention elements that are racist in the history of the United States. Now, that is part of the history of the United States. It doesn't mean that there are not honourable and admirable moments in the history of the United States either. But, I mean, the slavery and the treatment of black people in this country in particular is just this enormous stain that does exist and shouldn't be washed away in the name of patriotism.
I haven't seen anybody or any school say we shouldn't teach about slavery. That's obviously an important moment, a fundamental moment of American history. I think when we talk about things like critical race theory, what we're really talking about is we don't want kids indoctrinated to believe that the country is racist now, that the country is inherently racist, subconsciously racist, systemically racist. There are a lot of people who disagree with that, and they don't want it taught as being fact to their kids. You see it a lot in the transgender ideology, the transgender teaching. I think it could, parents think it could confuse kids. I think in some cases that's absolutely right. They want things that are age appropriate. I disagree with this idea that people are trying to erase the history. I want, if I had kids, I'd want them taught about slavery, I'd want them taught about Jim Crow, I'd want them talk about segregation, but I don't know if I necessarily want them to think that America is still the systemically racist country.
Well, I think that there is quite an amount of research that would suggest that racial discrimination is still something that very much pertains in this country. There have been those surveys, for example, that have been done where they send identical resumes with stereotypically black names versus stereotypically white names, and the black applicants typically get less callbacks. The whole criminal justice system and the issue of sentencing is one where I think many people would argue there is still racial discrimination in terms of those sentencing guidelines. So is teaching that, is acknowledging that, calling America a racist country? Should be done, whatever people think about it.
Yes, it depends. You can take them on a case-by-case basis. I think a lot of what we've seen with police and police being vilified like they were during the Black Lives Matter rallies, that was something that I thought was wildly inappropriate, something that was based on this idea, well, we're systemically racist, the police are all racist, and therefore we must call attention to it and tear that system down. I thought that was fundamentally unfair to the police. So I suppose you can go both ways on this issue.
Getting briefly to the second part that we mentioned there, which is this anti-Christian initiative or push or whatever on the part of the president, I am someone who is skeptical that there is really strong anti-Christian bias in this country. It has surfaced recently in relation to the people who were granted clemency of some kind regarding anti-abortion clinic protests. I would argue that the cases that I read about those people plainly broke the law, but perhaps from a conservative perspective, you see it differently.
Based on the facts of that case, I believe that they were blocking the door and that they were right to prosecute those people. I don't see a whole lot of anti-Christian bias. I think a lot of that could be that the Christians often throughout history have seen themselves being persecuted, but nowadays they do because they see that not everybody's with them anymore. Not everybody in this country is Christian anymore. In fact, the number of Christians is declining rapidly. I think I can understand how some people would be afraid of that and want to try to repair that by overworking the other side.
I mean, I think it's something that Trump is obviously responding to the concerns of his base on. I just question in a pretty fundamental way whether it really exists or whether it is a way simply to cater to that base. But we have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this.